Good evening and welcome to Greater Somerville for February 26, 2013. I'm KyAnn Anderson. Tonight's topic, homelessness in Somerville and how one local organization is battling this national epidemic. My guest tonight has been the executive director of the Somerville Homeless Coalition since the year 2000. He has championed this cause with countless events, fundraisers, and outreach to further their mission of ending homelessness once and for all. With these bitter winter months in front of us, it becomes even more important that we care for our homeless citizens and give them the opportunities that they rightfully deserve. On tonight's program, you will find out more about this valuable organization, as well as how your help is so vital during these trying economic times. So please join me in welcoming, for his debut appearance here on Greater Somerville, Mark Alston-Follansbee to the show.
Thank you, KyAnn.
Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of interesting because when you're the first-time guest, typically what happens is Joe and I, this is Joe's thing, not mine, but I'm following his orders, they like to do the weather report because you turn around and do the weather report. However, we have the blinds down, as you can see, because it's a little too glaring outside, so you're not going to have to do that. So I'm not going to put you through that. We're going to talk about the Somerville Homeless Coalition in a bit, but I wanted to find a little bit about you and what it is that you do and how you kind of came to be what you're doing now. So you've been an executive director of the Somerville Homeless Coalition since 2000.
I've been working with homeless people since 1986. I came to Boston in 1985 for sort of all the wrong reasons. I was fleeing. I was looking for a geographic cure. I was living in California. And came out here, but I started talking to people on the street when they would ask me for money because something about them seemed very familiar, and I really hadn't thought much about homelessness, if anything, and before that I don't think. But I started talking to these guys, and there was something about them that felt familiar. I found out that most of them were veterans. I had gotten kicked out of college in 1966, immediately drafted, and when I was 19 years old I was sent to Vietnam.
Okay.
And I was messed up for many years because of the experience that I had in Vietnam. As lucky as I was lucky in Vietnam. I was lucky when I came back that I had support from my family and friends, but it was still a very traumatic experience for me. So the fact that these folks were homeless because of their experience in war made me very angry that as a society, we hadn't figured out how to take care of them when they came back. So I started doing volunteer work in 1986, and within a few months, the city of Cambridge asked me to go to work for them. And I worked for the city for a little while, and then for a nonprofit in Cambridge for about 12 and a half years, and now I've been here. And this is a wonderful organization. I feel very lucky to be a part of the Somerville Homeless Coalition. Okay,
well that's wonderful, and it's great that you came from Cambridge because we always like it when we kind of pull
right.
people over to our side.
Well, I like to say that in Somerville we actually, walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk.
Oh, well, that's a little shout. No, I appreciate that. No, I agree with you. I think Somerville is a great place to be. On top of all of that, you're also the president of the Somerville Rotary.
So I was told when I came to the job. No, it's true.
Oh, okay.
I was told when I came to the job that being a member of the Rotary Club was sort of expected of me, and I had this funny idea of what the Rotary Club was, but I joined, and it turns out to be a wonderful group of people that I really enjoy meeting with once a week.
Okay.
And
once a week.
So we have a lunch meeting once a week. Rotary is an old organization. It was the first service club. There are Lions, there are Kiwanis, and there's Rotary. Rotary's responsible for more than any other organization in the world for eradicating polio. We do a lot of good things in Somerville. We do a lot of good things in the area, but we do a lot of good things worldwide. So, I tried to put off being the president. It's like it's everybody's turn, because my job is demanding.
Absolutely.
But everybody takes a turn, and this year it's my turn.
Well, good for you. And then also on top of all that, Director of Individual Programs for Shelter Incorporated.
So that's where I worked before I came to the Somerville Homeless Coalition.
Okay.
And I started a number of programs in Cambridge, and fortunately we've been able to continue that kind of work here in Somerville.
Are you still involved with sheltering?
No, it's another nonprofit organization.
Okay. So let's talk about the Somerville Homeless Coalition. Working to put ourselves out of business since 1985, which I think is a very clever and important slogan. So you guys do a lot of things, and your real emphasis is, transforming lives by providing services and support, resources and housing for well over 600 plus men, women, and children. Tell me some of the programs that you've got a lot of them, and we can talk about all of them, but what are some of the programs that you're most proud of in terms of what the Homeless Coalition is trying to do and how you're growing? Like, how has it changed?
So, like a lot of organizations dealing with homeless people, we started in 1985, and it was an organization that got together because they noticed that there were people hanging out in Davis Square that they hadn't seen before. Before the Red Line used to end in Harvard Square, and then suddenly in 1984 it's extended out to Alewife, and these folks were from Somerville, but if you were homeless from Somerville, you'd have to go to Cambridge or go into Boston to find shelter. So local people got together and they got the College Avenue United Methodist Church to let them convert what had been a bowling alley into the city's first shelter, and that opened in February of 1986. We opened a family shelter the year later. We took over the food pantries, Project Soup, in 1996. We started a case management program with federal funds in 1997. In 2000, we started permanent housing programs because nobody was building enough permanent housing for our folks. And over the last 8 years, we've really concentrated on prevention work. But when you think about how these programs all fit together, we still need an emergency response to the problem of hunger and homelessness in our community, because there are people who are homeless, there are people who are hungry. So we need those shelters, we need the food pantry. More and more our work, though, is not with people who are homeless, but it's people who were homeless that we've got in housing. We now have 175 families and individuals in permanent housing that we support.
That's wonderful.
And over the last few years, we've increased the number of people that we've been able to prevent from becoming homeless. So in 2010, we prevented 140 people from becoming homeless. In 2011, it was 225. Last year, it was 387 people we prevented from becoming homeless. We've brought 6 pools of money together. They include things like the walk we have here in Somerville every May. It's the Walk to Save Our Homes. We get some money from the city, we get some money from the United Way, we get some money from the federal government. But we were able to help 387 people, keep them housed. And it's such a benefit to society. If you look at what's happening across the Commonwealth now, the state spends about $36,000 a year to put a family in a homeless shelter. $36,000 a year. There are 2,000 shelter units that the state contracts out for. Those are filled, so they've rented out 1,700 hotel and motel rooms. And on top of that, they've got about 3,000 families that are on short-term subsidies that the state has given them. So it's this terrible problem of family homelessness that's really breaking the bank. It costs an enormous amount of money to shelter all of these folks. So $36,000 to put them in a shelter, we can put them in one of our apartments with all the supportive services they need for less than $20,000 a year. But the average cost last year to prevent a family from becoming homeless was just a little over $1,000.
Wow.
So it's a no-brainer. The problem is that as soon as we get this money for prevention, it goes out because the need coming in the door is so great.
Well, that was one thing I was going to ask, because obviously the last couple of years have been they've been a little challenging for all of us, but obviously there are individuals that are much more impacted by that. And I would guess that over time, or within that time frame, there's been a significant increase of homelessness in the area.
Yes, it's true. So I think we all sort of have this, idea of what a typical homeless, person looks like, and we still deal with those folks. There are people who have lots of disabilities. They don't have the earning power to be able to afford a market rate apartment around here. But over the last few years, and because of this recession, we've seen more and more people that were always housed, that always had a job, who are coming to us for help. It's really been one of the terrible things about this recession. There are about 50 million people in the United States living in poverty. For a family of 4, that's a little over $24,000 a year. During this recession, from 2008 until now, the number of people in deep poverty has risen from 16 million people to 25 million. Wow. Deep poverty is a family of 4 in Boston living on $11,000 a year. I don't know how they do it.
Wow.
So 25 million people living in deep poverty, only about 3 million people over the course of your experience homelessness in the country. And most of those people are just an episode where they get into a crisis, you know, they fall into homelessness, they need a little bit of time to get their lives back together and get out. And that's what our prevention program does. It puts a little Band-Aid, you know, on the problem, and we'll do whatever it takes to keep them housed.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, I was reading up on, you have for young adults, specifically 18 to 24, your sobriety and stability program, where you have a housing first philosophy, where you get them housed first, and then you provide the guidance and the support afterwards. It's kind of like what you were saying. Obviously, in situations like this, there's triage in a way. I mean, you have to prevent, you know, the actual problem of getting them off the streets, and then the guidance to move forward and prevent them from going back onto the streets. I mean, how long has that program specifically, and in Somerville, how has that, you know, I don't want to say, okay, well, who you have that's more in dire straits now, but are the, you know, 18 to 24-year-olds, are you finding that they're, because I've known a lot of people that are younger that are, you know, either coming out of college or there's just very little opportunities given the growth of the economy. So do you find that group of people have risen in terms of cases in Somerville?
The largest emerging subpopulations into homelessness are young adults. Most of these are kids that are aging out of other systems of care like foster care or juvie lockup. So they turn 18 and the state doesn't have any responsibility for them anymore, but they don't have any skills to live on their own. So our program is focused on 18 to 24-year-olds who are homeless and have a history of substance abuse. They have to be clean and sober to be in the program. They share an apartment. We give them all the support that they need. And it's really very exciting because what we've seen is that, and this was our first permanent housing program, so we've been doing it now for 11 years. But what we've seen is that with support, many of these kids are really able to transition into independence. You know, they develop the living skills that they need, as well as a job history, a housing history, because, you know, we're their landlord. And then they can go out and hopefully live good lives.
How do you find, I guess what I'm wondering is that the statistics that you have are, I mean, it's wonderful to hear all these people that are getting support, but in terms of those people that maybe do take a step backward, but is it a challenge to get people to, you know, once they're kind of, they leave the nest, if you will? I mean, how do you have means of tracking them down now so that you check it? Well, no, I mean, just to see how they're doing, because obviously for long-term benefits, you can say, okay, the Somerville Homeless Coalition has provided care and these people have gone on to got jobs, or they've gone to back to school, or, I mean, it's got to be hard to track.
It is hard to track, and it's true in all of our programs. And I think the main reason for that is that for a lot of people, probably for most people, being homeless has been a very traumatic experience. You know, and these are people who are probably already traumatized to begin with. We all have crisis in our lives, right? But most of us are fortunate to have family and friends to support us when we get in trouble. If there's a common denominator among homeless people, these are people who have burned their bridges. They don't have the supports that we all have. So when they get out of homelessness, it's probably, you know, not easy for them to look back and to stay in touch with us. A lot of people, we have a hard time keeping track of. We'd like to do more longitudinal studies to see what the effects of our work is. And we've been working with, there's a wonderful organization in Cambridge called Apt Associates that does program evaluation nationally and internationally. And they've been working as volunteers, some local employees. They live in Somerville and they like our work, and so they've been trying to help us figure out an outcomes measurement matrix. It's very difficult to get people to actually, you know, we'll give them $25 if you'll fill out this survey.
Well, I mean, sometimes money for, you know, for anything, if you fill out a survey for $1, I mean, we've all done it, but
it's hard to get people to come in and actually respond
to it.
But
I think your comment is a very good one. I mean, it's very, I would assume, very traumatic, and to be able to kind of, people might want to sever from it. I mean, they've gotten the help they need, and they don't want to look back, which on one hand is good because it means that they're moving forward, but you're right, it kind of makes it challenging to kind of gather the data. Getting back to the Somerville, I am curious, and if you have any of the statistics, is where does Somerville rank in terms of cases of homelessness versus, say, surrounding areas?
So one thing about homeless populations is that it's very mobile, right? And
True.
people know where the goods, resources are. So like our homeless shelter, has a reputation. You have to be sober, you have to be cooperative. But if you really want to get support and try to make some change in your life, it's a great place to go because we will give you support. You can stay in our shelter as long as you need to make a healthy move out. So, there's a certain niche that we have. The problem is, and we do this census count every year for the federal government. We have about 150 people, families and individuals at any given time who are homeless in Somerville. The majority of those, the vast majority, it's only a handful of people who actually live out on the street. Everybody else is here in a program, whether they're in a recovery program through CASPAR, they're in our domestic violence shelter at Respond, or they're in one of our programs, one of our shelters, or part of our permanent housing program. That number, though, stays fairly consistent because as soon as we get somebody out the shelter back door into housing, there's somebody at the front door who's there to fill that bed.
Now, how many people do you have? Are you at maximum capacity and you can only...
We're always at maximum capacity, and we often are over capacity because the need is so great. We'll put people on the SOAP if we have to. But our shelter has grown. When it opened in 1986, it had 6 beds. It went to 8 beds, then 12 beds, and it now has 16 beds. Our family shelter has 20 beds for 5 families. We have a preference in our adult shelter for people who are from Somerville. Our family shelter, the families all come from the state. We don't control who comes into the shelter.
I was going to ask if you had a way of, not to say you give preferential treatment to people from Somerville, but in effect, if what you're saying is true and everybody comes to our area because the shelters are so, they provide such wonderful facilities, I wonder how you would do that.
So in the old days, just before I came, the family shelter had 5 bedrooms. There were 4 that were controlled by the state, and one of them was a community room. So if a family in Somerville became homeless, that was available to them. They didn't have to go through the welfare department to access it. Just before I came, when we redid our contract with the state, they made us give up that room, and they took all 5. So the state knows that we still have a preference for Somerville families.
So you have
and there is a law on the state that they have to be within X number of miles, and I'm sorry I can't remember how many miles that is.
We won't test you at the end of the show.
Of their city of origin. But families come from all over.
So talk to me a little bit about the permanent housing and how you've mentioned. Do you have kind of certain providers or certain agreements with some of the property owners around the city of Somerville that then provide a certain subsidy, and then how does that work?
So this was something that we realized that we have wonderful relationships with our local CDC, the Somerville Community Corporation, but they can't build enough housing to meet the need. They do as much as they can. They're wonderful. We love them, but we need more housing than they're able to provide. So we started applying for federal grants in 2001. We get money from HUD that allows us to lease apartments out on the open market. We have to pay they have a limit on how much we can pay, a fair market rate, which has now become difficult to find as how the rents have gone up.
I know, I was just,
But HUD gives us money. We rent apartments. We've taken people who were on the street for 30 years. This sort of your idea of a chronic street person, put them in one of our apartments and successfully housed them. And I was just talking to one of the guys this morning, and he's a Vietnam veteran. He was homeless for 30 years, a street alcoholic. He said he tried many times to get sober, but he could never do it until he came to us. Because of the support that we give him, he's actually been able to stay sober now for 8 years.
Wow.
And he loves his apartment. I would say
that's going to make you feel wonderful.
It does. It's one of those mixed blessings, right? Because there's so many people. We can't help everybody who comes to us who needs help. There are many more people, things that we could do if we had the resources to do it, but we don't have the resources.
Well, talking about resources, obviously there's been a lot of cuts to everything, and I'm sure there are frustrations. Like, what are some of the things that, people I don't think are aware of the severity of these cuts on organizations that, such as yours. So what are some of those things that in the last couple of years you had mentioned that, because we were talking a little bit before the show about, how many people you have working for you. Somerville Homeless Coalition has about 30 or so full-time people, and even, more than that part-time. But, those cuts come, and then that obviously impacts. So in the last couple of years, what have been the primary impacts that you've seen?
So the state, because of this growing problem of homelessness and our budgets being out of control, has cut our family shelter back and our individual shelter, both shelters, back significantly over the last 10 years. And we've had to minimize the staff. I mean, we won't run a program if we don't think it's safe. So we still have enough staff. We depend more upon volunteers to help us augment things that the staff used to do. But we've been able to replace those people with folks who are doing things like case management or the permanent housing. Everybody who's in our permanent housing program, the 175 families and individuals, has a supportive service worker that works with them in their apartment to make sure that they're a good tenant, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So the staff has stayed about the same. We've just changed the arrangement from fewer people in the shelter and more people in the permanent housing program.
What do you think in terms of Somerville? Obviously, we've touched a little bit on the gentrification issue and all the development that's going on, obviously making rents rise, et cetera. The affordable housing percentage, I know, has been a hot topic in terms of what percentage of developments need to be affordable housing, and Somerville Coalition, they want it higher, obviously.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think it's something that's control? I mean, what are your thoughts on what we can best do to control it, to allow for opportunities for organizations such as yourself to,
Again, we want to partner with, folks like Somerville Community Corporation to develop the housing. That I always think, that it's so odd how, a community, to be a healthy community, needs everybody to be able to live here. And I think, it's like even at the bank, if they want somebody to come in and clean the bank, that person's got to live here or nearby in order to get to their job on time. So I think it's in everybody's best interest that we have a mix of housing, that we have enough housing for everybody who needs it. And I think the hardest thing for me is when you see people who were born in Somerville, they grew up in Somerville, and they can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah.
So we're fortunate that Somerville has, a linkage law. If anybody wants to develop housing or other kinds of businesses, they've got to have X number of those, have to be affordable. And some of those will come to people who are, like our folks are at the bottom of the economic ladder. A lot of affordable housing development goes for people who are like firemen and teachers, policemen. That's important too.
Yeah.
Our folks are, at the bottom of the economic ladder, and it's important to make sure that we've got a piece of that. Places like Assembly Square, in those 400 units.
Huge development. Yeah.
400 units right now under development by Avalon Bay. That they're going to have, and I can't remember what the number is, but it's what 12% or something are going to be affordable. I think that the city does a great job in trying to push affordable housing in Somerville. One of the limitations we have is that we're a very compact area physically. We're only 4 square miles. There's very little space to develop anything.
Yes. Or put snow in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, it's tight. It's tight. So making more development. But the Assembly Square is an opportunity, as some would say, to allow that. I mean, that's great that they're putting. Obviously, they need to. But
yes.
Getting back to the local government, I'm curious what your thoughts are. And obviously, you're not going to. But I mean, do you feel? I don't want to be controversial, but
Okay.
These are important questions asked. What are your thoughts on local government support versus, say, federal? I mean, like how do you feel we're doing, or what are areas of strength and weakness?
So, I mean, I feel very fortunate that we have a strong mayor who I think really cares about people. He gets it. He wants Somerville to be a vibrant city for everybody to be able to live, work, and play and raise a family in, right? The problem is that we don't have a very diversified tax base. We don't get enough money internally to do everything the city would like to do. And to a great extent, the Commonwealth, is in the same boat, that the Commonwealth is strapped for money. And if you look at what's happened in the federal government over the last 25 years, the federal government has cut $40 billion in housing supports for poor people over the last 25 years. It started with Ronald Reagan. There's a direct correlation between the amount of money that HUD cut and the increase in homelessness over the last 25 years. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And they've replaced that $40 billion cut in housing with $2 billion in homeless services. It's obviously not enough. So I think Somerville, the city of Somerville, does everything it can to address these issues. I think the Commonwealth does everything that it can do. But the reality, I think, is that it's only the federal government, with the amount of money that they've got to actually be able to affect things like creating enough housing for everybody. And the Secretary of HUD, Philip Johnson, a couple of months ago said that, they're spending about $1.9 billion now on these homeless services. He said if he had 10 times that amount of money, he'd be able to make a real dent in the problem. And we can see it. It's where the resources are put. So last year, the VA put a lot of resources into housing homeless veterans, and there was a 17% decrease in the number of homeless vets last year. It's wonderful.
Wow, that's
At the same time,
wonderful.
There was an increase in the number of homeless families because those resources weren't there.
Were allocated, so you can see.
I think that all have to, and it's in Massachusetts. We've got these very liberal, congressmen. If you look at, Congressman Capuano, he's been pushing affordable housing forever. They do a great job. But the rest of the country doesn't have the same kind of values that we do and think about these as a responsibility of government.
Well, here's a question for you. We've got a couple more minutes, but I just want to ask this. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the show was just, getting people off the street, but then there are those people that are the perpetual people that are on the street. Those are the ones that are asking you for money. Like, I have to say, I'm often walking on the street and I'll pass by a lot of homeless people, and I've brought them meals, I've done various things, but on occasion I've given certain people money, and then I've walked into a liquor store and I'm one of those people. I'm Minnesota nice, I try, but I really that was very challenging for me to see. And so now with that,
you walked into a liquor store
and
I
saw this gentleman about maybe 20 minutes later in a liquor store. And now, I'm by no means, getting to the root of the problem is really the key here. It's not passing judgment. But what I'm going to say is that for a common perception of, where is that money going? I personally want to know. I mean, it sounds like you've got so many wonderful programs. Is the better bet to take that money and invest it directly into a local organization, so that you're obviously going to get more impact with your money? Because I always feel bad walking by these people, but at the same time, on the occasions that I have given, there's been a couple times like that. And I think that you obviously battle that in terms of where homelessness comes in terms of, I don't say importance, it's very important, but how do you handle that? How do you...
So a couple of things. One is, if you're a street alcoholic and you don't have alcohol, you could die.
I know, yeah.
That's a fact. So an alcoholic needs alcohol. So I don't think we should judge them for going in the liquor store.
Okay.
I don't give them money.
Well, see, that's the thing. You feel like you want to do something. No, it's a very good point, and I don't want to come across as a judgmental person. It's more of a... Wow, I wanted him to buy a sandwich, but it's a good point that you raised. To
me, the hardest thing about being homeless is the way we cut them off from their own humanity. We reject them, we make them other than us. So I think the most important thing is just to say hello and ask them how they're doing. Just tell them that you see them, tell them that you care, tell them you're sorry that they're in the situation they're in. And then you could also ask them if they know where our office is and send them down.
No, that's actually a good idea to know, because it seems like, in terms of, I feel wonderful knowing that there are organizations, people like you that work as hard as you do to make sure that these individuals know what you're about, so that they can receive help. And that's just a handful of them. And by no means, again, like I said, it's something that I always wonder, okay, well, where do I put my money? And Somerville Homeless Coalition obviously needs people to donate, especially when they're not getting as much funding as they once did. So we only have a couple of minutes. So this is my my wrap-up question. I told Mark that we're going to have our little wrap-up question because I always find this interesting. We talked a little bit about how you got into doing what you're doing. But what, of all the things that you do on a daily basis, as busy as you are, what would be, say, the most let's start with the most challenging aspect of what you do?
I think the hardest thing is that, we have the experience now, we have the skills to really address these problems, but we don't have enough resources. And it just boggles my mind how, the federal government and the state will spend millions of dollars on shelters. Shelters are not the answer. The answer to homelessness is a home. Yeah. So give us the money that we need to do what you've asked us to do. The federal government doesn't want to take responsibility for these folks. The state has some responsibility. They know that, but they don't want to give us enough to do the job. So help us to get the money, the resources we need to do the job right. And then the flip side of that, what's really exciting is when somebody walks in and talks to me who is doing well in their apartment, and is so grateful that we've given them a place to live and gotten them off the street. And it's very rewarding. But I think that, as a society, we have lots of questions about what our values are. What do we mean to each other? Yeah. I grew up in Minnesota with Hubert Humphrey.
Great, little Minnesota. I didn't know that.
Hubert Humphrey always said that the responsibility of government is to help people who can't help themselves. And he always talked about the elderly, the disabled, and children. And if you look at our society today, we've turned our backs on these folks. And to me, that's wrong. To me, we're all lessen. We're all less. I'm sort of that we hang together or we all hang separately kind of mentality. So what is it? What does community really mean to us now? What do we need to take care of these social problems? And so that everybody can, succeed.
Wow. That's a wonderful thought, and I absolutely agree with you. I think... Sorry, you've just given me so much to think about. I'm kind of like off my game here, but I'd like to thank our guest, Mark Alston-Follansbee, for coming on to Greater Somerville tonight and talking with us tonight about the Somerville Homeless Coalition and shedding some light on shedding some much needed light on this important community epidemic and just what is being done to prevent it. And I personally would like to just take this opportunity for the amount of work that you've given to making Somerville a better place. I think people like this in our community need to be commended because they give everything. And it's been a number of years, and we're living in a better community because of you and your work.
Thank you, KyAnn.
And for those of you who are able to get involved with the Somerville Homeless Coalition, please check out our website on the Greater Somerville blog. It will have all the information on there. Or you can check out www.somervillehomelesscoalition.org. And that does it for us tonight. So thank you to the viewers at home for watching.
Thank you.
And as always, stay safe and stay informed. Good night, everyone.